The morning sun cast a golden glare over the precinct parking lot as Officer Dan Callahan stepped out of his cruiser, coffee in one hand, ego in the other. He had been with the force for nearly 15 years and carried himself with the swagger of a man convinced the badge gave him power, not responsibility. As he strolled toward the entrance, he noticed a black woman standing quietly near the steps. She was dressed sharply in a charcoal blazer, slacks, and modest heels, composed, calm, and waiting. Her silence bothered him more than it should have. Without so much as a greeting, Dan narrowed his eyes and barked, "You lost or something?" The woman turned to him with a measured expression, but before she could respond, he let out a sharp laugh. "Figures. Another one of you wandering where you don't belong." He didn't give her a chance to explain. Instead, he stepped closer and with utter disrespect spat on the ground near her feet, close enough that flecks of saliva landed on the tip of her polished shoes. The woman stood still, her gaze fixed on him. Not angry, not startled, just steady. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone even unreadable. Dan smirked. "This is a police station, lady, not a waiting lounge for people like you." At that moment, the double doors of the station burst open, and out rushed Captain Morales, his face pale as paper. "Chief Hayes, I was just coming to greet you," he blurted, breathless. The smirk evaporated from Dan's face. He blinked, confused, then looked back at the woman. She reached into her blazer and calmly pulled out a silver badge, flipping it open. The gold letters glinted in the sun. "Chief Jordan Hayes, City of Brookside Police Department." "I'm the new police chief," she said flatly, "and it looks like we have a problem." Dan opened his mouth, but no words came. He had spat on his new boss, without knowing she was not just any black woman, but the highest-ranking officer in the department. The air thickened with awkward silence as officers inside began peeking through windows, having heard enough to know a storm was coming. Chief Hayes didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone shattered the illusion of superiority Dan had worn like armor his whole career. By the next morning, the station was buzzing, not with activity but with silence. An uncomfortable, lingering stillness filled every hallway, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The story had spread like wildfire. Officers whispered behind closed doors, and glances were exchanged with uneasy curiosity whenever Chief Jordan Hayes passed by. No one dared speak to her about what had happened in the parking lot, but everyone knew. Officer Dan Callahan, once the loudest presence in the room, now sat hunched at his desk, hands clenched tightly, jaw set. The arrogance he once flaunted like a badge of honor had vanished overnight. He avoided eye contact, even with those who used to laugh at his off-color jokes. His world had shifted, and it showed. Chief Hayes moved through the precinct with a quiet authority that turned heads. She didn't raise her voice, didn't posture. Her power came from how little she needed to prove. She greeted every officer by name, made direct eye contact, and took mental notes of how people responded. When she entered the main briefing room for the first time, all conversations ceased. The atmosphere changed like a snapped wire. "I know most of you don't know me yet," she began, standing at the front of the room, "but you will. And let me make one thing clear. This department is about to change. I wasn't brought here to maintain the status quo. I'm here to rebuild trust, not just with the community, but within these walls." Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a stone dropped in still water. Disrespect, discrimination, and unchecked ego have no place here. I don't care who you are, how long you've been wearing a badge, or how many arrests you've made. If you can't treat people with dignity, you're in the wrong building. Though she didn't mention Dan by name, everyone knew who she was talking about. Her gaze lingered on him for a heartbeat, just long enough for the message to hit home. Dan sat frozen, humiliated in the most painful way. Not by yelling, not by revenge, but by being forced to face what he was. The room remained silent long after she walked out. A new order had entered the precinct, and no one could ignore it. Chief Jordan Hayes didn't need to announce her credentials. They spoke for themselves, quietly through decades of service reform and the scars of a system she had once feared but chose to change from the inside. Few in the precinct knew that she had grown up just 10 miles away, in a neighborhood the city preferred to forget. Police rarely came there unless sirens were blaring, and when they did, it wasn't to protect, it was to punish. Her older brother, Marcus, had been stopped by officers more times than she could count. One time at 16, he was slammed against a wall for looking suspicious on his way home from work. Jordan never forgot the look in his eyes when he walked through their front door that night, shirt torn, pride broken. She vowed then and there to become the thing that terrified her community, but not in the way they feared. She would wear the badge to protect, not control. Over the next 2 decades, Jordan climbed the ranks in departments across the state, known for rooting out corruption and building bridges in places where trust had long since burned to ash. She didn't play politics. She played fair, and that made her enemies in high places, but also allies in unlikely ones. The mayor had brought her in not just for appearances, but because the department had a rot deep inside, and he knew she had the backbone to cut it out. The officers in Brookside didn't know any of this. They only saw a woman who didn't match the image many of them had in their minds when they thought of a police chief. She was soft-spoken, but not soft, professional, but not distant, and most threatening of all, she didn't flinch. As the days passed, she walked the halls and scheduled one-on-one meetings with every sergeant and shift supervisor. She asked questions, listened more than she spoke, and took notes on what was said and what was avoided. Meanwhile, Dan Callahan walked the station like a ghost. The confidence that once followed him like a shadow had evaporated. He saw the way the other officers avoided his gaze now, no longer laughing at his crude remarks or backing him up with blind loyalty. For the first time, he felt what it was like to be on the outside looking in. And Chief Hayes? She never mentioned his name, not once. But her presence alone was a constant reminder that the world he thought he ruled had changed overnight. It came faster than Dan expected. Less than 2 weeks after the incident in the parking lot, he was summoned to Internal Affairs. The investigation had been quiet, thorough, and backed by hard evidence. Security footage showed the moment clearly: his words, his posture, the spit landing near Chief Hayes' shoes. There was no spinning it, no way to twist the narrative. Several officers had witnessed the scene, and not one came to Dan's defense. In fact, 2 had quietly submitted statements condemning his behavior, noting previous incidents that suddenly no longer seemed like harmless jokes. For the first time in years, accountability had arrived at Brookside PD, and it wore heels and a charcoal blazer. When Dan entered Chief Hayes' office, it felt different. The air was heavier, like walking into judgment itself. She was seated behind her desk, calm and unreadable as always, but something in her eyes made his stomach twist. He'd rehearsed excuses, apologies, even considered saying he didn't recognize her. None of it seemed to fit now. "Officer Callahan," she began, voice firm but measured, "the review is complete. Your actions on your first interaction with me were not only disrespectful, but also in direct violation of our department's code of conduct. You spat near a civilian's feet and made a derogatory remark based on race and appearance. Whether you knew who I was or not is irrelevant. You were in uniform. You represent this badge every second you wear it." Dan tried to interrupt, but she raised her hand. "This isn't a debate. You're being suspended without pay, effective immediately. Termination proceedings have already begun." Her words were sharp but fair. There was no personal venom in them. That somehow made it worse. She wasn't out for revenge. She was simply doing what leaders do, enforcing standards. "You think I'm the problem?" Dan said, quietly, anger bubbling in his throat. "I think you're a symptom," she replied, "and I'm here to treat the disease." He left her office without another word, passing officers who barely looked up from their desks. No one offered comfort. No one followed him out. For the first time, Dan understood what it felt like to be invisible in a place where he once held all the power. Justice didn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It came with quiet resolve, and that was exactly what Chief Jordan Hayes carried in every step. A month later, the station barely resembled the one Chief Hayes had walked into. The silence that once coated the walls had been replaced by the hum of real conversations. Some awkward, some overdue, but all necessary. Officers who once kept their heads down had begun speaking up about issues they'd long ignored. Subtle racism, toxic traditions, favoritism that let officers like Dan skate by unchecked. Chief Hayes didn't just enforce policy, she changed culture. She implemented new training programs, brought in mental health experts, and invited local community leaders to monthly precinct forums. The department, for the first time in years, started to feel like it served the people, not just policed them. Dan Callahan's dismissal was finalized quietly. No protests, no appeals, not even a whisper of support from the old boys club he thought had his back. His name disappeared from the roster like a forgotten stain scrubbed clean. Some said he moved to another town, others heard he was fighting to get hired in private security. But no one missed him, not even the officers who used to laugh at his jokes. They saw what real leadership looked like now, and there was no going back. At a press conference, reporters pressed Chief Hayes on the incident with Dan. She handled it with the same grace she brought to everything else. "I didn't come here to fire people," she said. "I came here to lead." But leadership means drawing lines. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of public service. Her words echoed across social media and into homes where people had long stopped trusting police departments. For the first time, Brookside PD was being talked about as a model for reform, not a cautionary tale. Weeks later, a young black girl in a school uniform visited the precinct with her mother during a community open house. She looked up at Chief Hayes wide-eyed and asked, "Are you really the boss of all the police?" Hayes knelt down, smiled, and said, "Yes, I am, and one day you could be too." That moment said more than any policy memo or press release ever could. Chief Hayes didn't need loud speeches or grand gestures. She brought change through presence, through principle, and through quiet strength that shook the walls of a system built to overlook women like her. She didn't just command a precinct. She redefined what power looks like when it finally answers to justice.